So we're gonna spend most of our time today talking about how does the brain communicate with your muscles and tell it to contract, but then how does it control how much force you're going to get, right? So we see Erin is doing her little, like, is that like an 8 ounce or a 12 ounce little thing of Red Bull that she's picking up, right? That takes a precise amount of force across multiple muscles to do that exact movement, okay? Anyone that's ever had the experience of picking up a box that you thought was going to be really heavy and it turned out that it wasn't, right? When we get this mismatch of what we expect the force to be versus what it actually needs to be, then there's going to be some problems. And we're usually really good at this, and we're going to talk about the why of that today. How is everything set up so that we can very, very precisely control force production? And then we'll talk about some other kind of interesting or more specialized circumstances about how fast or versus slow that we're going to go, whether you're doing a concentric contraction or an eccentric contraction or an isometric contraction. So there's some other things that we kind of have to overlay on top of just how much muscle is being activated or how many actin to myosin cross bridges are we forming. There's some other circumstances that occur with movement that we need to be aware of because they're going to play a big role in kind of how much force we get or why you can do certain things in certain ways. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end. We'll start talking about some of the things that change when you do resistance training, when you do stuff that requires high forces multiple days per week. Like how does the system kind of change and adapt to make your muscles get bigger, let you generate more force, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where we're going to try to get to today. Okay. So if we were going to be in person, we would have some really fun kind of in-class demonstrations where we would see how much weight people can lift and make people do some different things. We're going to see a scenario whereby certain kinds of contractions, you don't get tired doing them. And so what we normally will do is we will find the person that we think is the biggest, strongest person in class, and then we'll find someone that is very clearly probably not as strong as them, and we'll have them kind of compete doing some things. And I can usually set it up where the weaker person will win based upon some of the underlying physiology. So we'll try to talk through some examples of that. If anybody has some like weights or some dumbbells like laying around in your room very near you and you want to like stand up and do some demonstrations for us, I'm happy to let you do all of that if you really you want to do all that. So, but let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will get rolling. While I'm doing that, does anybody have questions about anything from the last couple of days? If you looked at the study guide, seen that there's anything that like, oh, he didn't talk about this, or I'm not 100% certain like what he means about these things, or anything else so far? Okay, seeing no questions, hearing no questions, then we will go ahead and start talking about kind of where we are. Ooh, I thought I was where I was supposed to be. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So we talked about this briefly yesterday, okay? But we're going to get into kind of the more specific name for it today, and I'll try to put it in some context as to why you need to care and why this matters and why it's important, okay? So there is a process. We talked about it yesterday where I remember that I said that we're going to release acetylcholine across the neuromuscular junction. It binds to the acetylcholine receptors. And then from the acetylcholine receptor, we're going to generate an action potential on the sarcolemma, so on the membrane of that muscle fiber. And it's going to move out along that sarcolemma in 3 dimensions, and it's going to come upon a T-tubule, and it's going to go down the T-tubule, and then that's going to bring that action potential down where it's then going to tell the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. And then that calcium binds to troponin, and then we're going to get actin to myosin interacting, okay? So the process by which, okay, we're going to get a signal from the sarcolemma, okay, action potential on the sarcolemma, to the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then that is going to in turn lead to actin and myosin interacting and getting force production. This process is called excitation contraction coupling. Okay. And it is just exactly what it says. We're coupling or kind of putting together the excitation, so action potential on the sarcolemma, with that release of calcium that leads to the formation of an actin and myosin crossbridge and therefore a muscle contraction. Okay. So that's loosely what this whole kind of process that we covered to some extent yesterday is called. The reason that excitation contraction coupling is so immensely important is that in a lot of instances, okay, Gavin, you're the first person that is kind of on my screen there. If we had Gavin just like hold something up over his head like this for as long as he possibly could, like we imagine, Gavin, at some point you had to put your arms down, do you think? Or like if you did this, like you if I said like, Gavin, if you hold this up for all of class and you never put them down, I'll just give you an A in class right now and you never have to come back. Do you think you could do that?
No.
Okay. So very, very motivated, but at some point you're going to fatigue and you're going to have to put your arms down. And one of the reasons that you're going to have to do that is that excitation contraction coupling is going to get messed up. Okay. So impairments in excitation contraction coupling is one of the primary mechanisms by which we get muscle fatigue. It's one of the reasons that people have to, if you're doing as many push-ups as you can, an impairment in this is one of the reasons why you can't do any more push-ups or you can't do any more sit-ups. Okay. Or in some instances, if you've been running for a while, then you're going to begin to have to slow down, and it may be because of impairments in excitation contraction coupling. So this is one of the primary kind of sets of processes where fatigue can occur. And we're not going to get into all of the ins and outs of all of that. Dr. Mike will cover a whole lot more of that, okay, in exercise phys, but I like to introduce it here because it's really, really important, you know, that this process functions correctly so that we can get adequate amounts of force production. Okay. So this is just kind of a cartoon schematic of what all of that is going to be. Okay. So I think I realized I tried this morning before class that this YouTube link is dead. Or maybe the video has been taken down, but it was supposed to be a video of the sliding filament theory of contractions, of the formation of an actin and myosin crossbridge, and then the myosin head tilting and pulling the actin molecule along. When class is over today, I will go and find us a new YouTube video, and I will post that in the announcement so you guys can kind of have a narrative version. But I'm hopeful that you guys have seen all of this. Okay, so I know that I've been using the term crossbridge. I don't think I actually mentioned that yesterday, but if we look here, what you can see is in the green here, we've got our actin filament. In the purple, you've got our myosin filament, and this little area right here that I've put in the box where the head of the myosin molecule makes that connection to actin. When the myosin binds to actin, we call that a crossbridge, okay? It's this bridge that has been formed between these two filaments. Initiation of a crossbridge is the event that happens right before. It immediately precedes the generation of force by myosin. And so anytime you do a contraction that requires force, you're making these cross bridges. Then this cross bridge is going to, the myosin head is going to try to tilt in this direction, okay? And it pulls along on that actin. So you get cross bridge formation, and then from formation, you're going to get what we call a power stroke. When the myosin head tilts backwards, that's called the power stroke, okay? And so making the cross bridge gets us force. Doing the power stroke, where the myosin head actually moves and pulls the actin, gets us movement, okay? So we need a power stroke to get movement, and I've run out of space on my slide here, okay? Does that make sense? I'm sure you guys have heard all of this before in anatomy and phys, but does that make sense? Because if we don't get this, then the next slide that I'm going to show you is really, really going to be kind of a problem. And then talking about sort of the different ways that these cross bridges behave to generate concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions is not going to make a lot of sense. So now is our time to ask a question about this and help me clarify anything, okay? Going once, going twice.
I have a question.
Yes,
So
Jenna.
what does I don't know if it got cut off at the top of the screen, but it looks like you wrote power stroke and then something, and I don't
Yeah,
understand.
it did get cut off. My screen is bigger than where it lets me write on there. It's meant to say movement, Jenna.
Oh,
When you
okay.
get
Thank you.
a power stroke, you have to have the power stroke to be able to get movement, or at least to get shortening in the muscle. And that will make more sense in a couple of slides, but that's what I was trying to write.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know if it got cut off or if it meant
It
something.
did. And I'm not
Thank you.
sure 100% how to, no, how do I let me, I don't know how to actually erase things in PowerPoint with my stylus. So, okay. Anybody else? We're okay. Actin and myosin bind, that forms a cross bridge. When we get a cross bridge, we get force. We then, as we begin to get force, the myosin head's going to tilt. That's the power stroke. That's going to initiate a shortening movement in a muscle. Okay. Okay. So imagine we've done all of this. We've had excitation contraction coupling. We've formed a cross bridge, which you can see right here. Okay. We are then going to get a power stroke. All right. Now the real fun begins. Okay. So once you've done this, you have to imagine that when the myosin head tilts, that myosin molecule is a few micrometers in length. Okay. So it has pulled and moved the actin this tiny, tiny, tiny amount that you can only like sort of see and visualize under an electron microscope. Okay. I've seen videos of it. It is one of the most astounding and coolest things, at least that I've ever seen in my life, is to see an actual myosin head tilt and pull actin. But if you're going to perform a contraction, you're going to walk, you're going to run, you're going to lift weights, you're going to do whatever it is that you're doing. When I move my arm like this, my bicep is shortening by multiple centimeters. Okay. So, I mean, there are a micrometer, there's 100,000 micrometers in a, no, that would be in a meter. So there's like 1,000 micrometers or something in a centimeter. My conversions are not working on it. Take home, there's a bunch of them. Okay. So this thing moves once. That's not going to get you a movement that's going to be very functional for you. Okay. So what has to happen then is we have to break this cross bridge apart. We have to break myosin off of actin and then do this whole thing over again many, 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 many times with all of the myosin molecules, or many of them in our muscles, in order to generate a visual movement. Okay. And so this is where, okay, when we talk about physical activity, and we talk about physical activity being an increase in energy expenditure above resting level, what I'm about to show you right here, this thing called the cross bridge cycle, where we connect and then move, but then we have to break and then reconnect and then move with our actin and myosin, this is where that increase in energy expenditure that leads to us saying something is physical activity is going to come from. Okay. And this is why I think that what happens in muscles is the primary thing that drives all of the other physiological responses to exercise and physical activity. So we've done excitation contraction coupling. We've formed a cross bridge. We've done the power stroke. Okay. What happens next in the cross bridge cycle is, to me, the most unintuitive thing potentially in all of physiology that I've ever encountered. And I've seen a lot of stuff. There's some weird stuff that happens in reproductive physiology. This is weirder to me, okay, or less intuitive. So in order to break actin and myosin apart, in order to sever the cross bridge, I need ATP to come in and bind to the myosin molecule, okay? So ATP binds to myosin, and that breaks the crossbridge apart, okay? Once that happens, then that ATPase, that myosin ATPase enzyme that we mentioned that differs between fiber types yesterday, cleaves the ATP into ADP and a molecule of inorganic phosphate that allows the myosin head to move back to its kind of like pulling the hammer back on a pistol or something, to its kind of cocked position, and then we can start the whole process over again. But it's this step right here, okay, that I find to be really strange and really backwards. We do not use energy, okay, to cause a cross bridge to form. We do not use energy to cause force to be generated. We use energy in the cross bridge cycle to stop the contraction and break the cross bridge, and then allow us to form another one so that we can continue to move, okay? So we're not using energy to do the contraction, we're actually using the energy to stop it. Even if it's during this movement, as I do all of this, I'm doing this cross bridge cycle thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Like, you won't feel the fact that you've stopped generating force, but that's what's actually happening, okay? So when you go for a walk or you go for a run and you start using energy above rest, that energy is coming from ATP, or the vast majority is from ATP being used to break your actin and myosin cross bridges apart. Okay. So questions about any of that? I do want you guys to know and understand the cross bridge cycle. And I want you guys to understand sort of what we're talking about with this idea of what's called the high energy configuration and the low energy configuration of the myosin head. Okay. So if we look here, when the myosin, so the high and low energy configuration is in relation to the state of, has the myosin head done the power stroke or not, okay? So the resting state of the myosin head is this high energy conformation, and that's basically the quote unquote kind of cocked position. It's ready so that when it grabs actin, it can then pull and move. Once it has done that pulling motion, okay, it's gone as far as it can, that is then called the low energy conformation. It doesn't actually have anything really to do with whether or not where the ATP is used, or if ADP and inorganic phosphate are bound. What it really has to do is just that state of, is it cocked or not, so that it can be able to move. Okay. Okay. Questions about this? Okay. All right, because we need to understand how this energy use and where it's used and all of this, because it's going to make some things that happen in your everyday life maybe make a whole lot more sense to you. Okay. If we're going to look at things in this particular way, we're going to come back to this in just a minute. Okay. All right. So we have a general idea now of this whole process going from the brain down the spinal cord, alpha motor neurons, down our axons, across the neuromuscular junction. We then do excitation, contraction, coupling from the sarcolemma to the T-tubule to calcium release. Calcium binds troponin. It moves tropomyosin. We get an actin and myosin cross bridge, right? It then tilts. We get a power stroke. We get force. We get movement. ATP comes in and binds it. We break it off, and we're ready to start the whole process over again. Okay. And so all of these steps take fractions of seconds. So this lets us get force, this lets us get movement. But what it doesn't really characterize for us is, how do we adjust how much force we get? How do we lift something light and like not throw the stylus behind my head, versus if I was going to stand up and try to pick up my kitchen table here, something where I need a lot more force, okay, in that particular way. So one of the ways that we kind of talk about this is, I call it the control of force production, okay? And so the initial place that we control how much force we generate, which lets us do all of these kind of really cool coordinated movements, is through something called motor unit recruitment or motor unit activation, okay? Very simply, Okay. We're going to define recruitment as the number of muscle fibers, or really it's the number of motor units, which is going to be the motor neuron and the muscle fibers that it connects to, the number of motor units that are undergoing excitation contraction coupling and therefore potentially undergoing the formation of cross bridges. Okay. That's recruitment. In a simpler way of thinking about it, when I recruit a muscle fiber, I'm simply turning it on. Okay. I'm turning it on. So the idea of recruitment, this on-off switch of muscles, is absolutely 100%, okay, 99.9% of the time controlled by the nervous system. Okay. You have conscious control of all of these things. Okay. So if no, go back. Let me see somebody else who they've got their picture up. If I said something like, Julia, I see you, touch your nose like this, please. Okay. Julia touches her nose. Okay. Now touch your ear. Now we're playing Dr. Black Says, right? So you're doing this. You have control. You think about it, right? And if I told you grab something sitting around you that's heavier and you got to pick that up and then touch that to your nose, that's going to require, you don't have to, a different amount of force. Okay. It's going to require different muscles. So the motor, excuse me, the motor cortex decides, okay, in a manner of speaking, which muscles it's going to turn on. And then within that muscle, it's going to decide how many motor neurons need to fire in order to turn on just enough muscle fibers to generate just enough force to do whatever movement, okay, that I want done. Okay. Think about force production in this way. If we'll ask this question, let me see, who else do I have that I can see here on my screen who's got their, you know, you're going to learn to not have your cameras on in this way. So I'll pick somebody that doesn't have their camera on. Let me look at this. Jacob, are you there, Jacob?
Yes.
Okay. Jacob, have you ever done a bicep curl?
Yes.
About how much weight do you think you can bicep curl?
Like max or just for reps?
Like
Usually,
max. You don't need to show off with reps.
No.
How much do you think you can max? You can max on a bicep curl.
Just like max one curl. I don't know, like 40 or 45.
Okay. So I give you a 40-pound dumbbell, let's say. Okay. And you're going to curl that 40-pound dumbbell for me. Why does that 40-pound dumbbell weigh 40 pounds?
Like 40.
No, I know. Yeah, but why does it weigh 40 and not 35 or 20 or something? Deep
I don't know.
questions, right? You don't know? Can anybody else have a guess? Why does anything weigh anything?
Isn't it based on like how much force it requires to like move it a particular amount or something?
You're getting close, Emma. You're getting close. So we'll do it this way. If I took said 45-pound dumbbell and we got on a SpaceX rocket and they blasted us off into outer space, does that 40-pound dumbbell still weigh 40 pounds?
No.
No.
Okay.
So gravity.
Gravity. Very good, Sonny. I think that was Sonny that said that. So
Yeah.
Gravity. So Jacob, your 40-pound dumbbell weighs 40 pounds because of gravity, right? It is pulling down at, whatever, 8.65 meters per second per cubed or something, whatever the force of gravity is, okay? If you want to pick up a 40-pound dumbbell, how much force does your bicep need to exert to be able to actually pick up that 40-pound dumbbell?
40 pounds, right?
40 pounds?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How many of you think 40 pounds? Show of hands or flash your thing at me if you think 40 pounds. Seems very straightforward, right? John is very hesitantly saying yes, he thinks 40 pounds. Okay. So the rest of you that seem to either be skeptical or you're afraid of asking something, we'll do it this way. Gabby, if Jacob generated 40 pounds with his 40-pound dumbbell, do you think it would move? Uh-oh, I caught Gabby not being there. Okay, we'll try someone else. Chandler, are you there?
Yes.
If Jacob generated 40 pounds, do you think the dumbbell would move?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. You think it depends on something? And if so, what do you think it depends on? Nobody wants to answer now. That's okay. I'm posing a deep question.
I think it does depend on something. I'm just not sure what.
Okay.
I'll take a jab at it.
Okay, go for it.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Loud in here.
You sound kind of like Darth Vader, Blake, but that's okay.
I would say it has to be over 40 pounds. Like you see the way for it to move. So you'd have to generate more force, like what it weighs.
Mm-hmm. I think you said you have to generate just a little bit more force to get it to move. So if it weighs 40 pounds and you generate 40 pounds of force, it's going to stay exactly in the same place that it was, because you're exactly balancing what the force that gravity is exerting to pull it down with whatever it is that you're pulling up. So if I am holding my cup right here like this, whatever my cup weighs, I am generating exactly that amount of force to exactly counteract gravity to hold it in place. If I want to pick it up, I have to generate just a tiny bit more than what gravity is in order to get it to move. When I want to set it down, what I do then is I generate ever so slightly less force than what gravity is exerting, and it lowers it down. So up a little bit more, I'm exactly matching. Now I'm lowering it down, okay? So I did that whole exercise so that you guys can maybe have a bit of an idea to try to understand how the motor cortex is going to work and how we're going to work with motor unit recruitment to be able to get the right amount of force to do whatever kind of movement that we want. So if I need to lift 20 pounds, the motor cortex has to turn on just enough motor units that are going to connect to just enough muscle fibers to get ever so slightly more than 20 pounds worth of force so that I can pick the thing up. And then when I want to set it down, if it's controlled, then the motor cortex turns off one or two motor units so that the force production begins to decline ever so slightly. Now gravity wins and I'm going to lower this thing down. Okay. Do you guys understand? Does that make sense kind of as a concept? I like to talk about this in the big picture so that when you think about doing an actual movement, this is what's going on. Okay. And so we're really, really, really good at motor unit recruitment. We can be very, very precise. Okay. Think about a time when you did an activity that you were not very used to doing. Okay. Maybe it was playing a sport you've never played before, like maybe you'd never been golfing and you went to swing a golf club, or you were trying to like ride a unicycle or a bike, or if you're me, like I went to yoga class one time and I'm like, this shit is hard. I do not know how to do this, okay? When you feel uncoordinated, you feel like you're not able to kind of control your body in space and you're not very able to contract your muscles in just the right order with just the right amount of force, okay? That's because it's new and your motor cortex has not learned, quote unquote, how to orderly recruit to generate just the right amount of force that we need to do those things, okay? When you practice something, you get better at this idea of motor unit recruitment, okay? Most of you, if I asked you, let me think about an activity. How many of you do power cleans on a regular basis? I should ask, how many of you know what a power clean is? Maybe a better place to start, okay? Several of you know what power cleans are in those ways. Gabby, they let y'all power clean?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's good for y'all. Y'all need to power clean. So a power clean, the bar's on the floor, you kind of bend over and you grab it and you pull up and then you kind of come under. It's a very complicated and difficult movement if you've never done it before. Okay. I take all of you, you've never done a power clean, you try the first time, you're going to feel super uncoordinated. You come back the next day and you're immediately better at doing it. You're going to be stronger, you can lift more weight, because most of us with movements we're not familiar with, we cannot recruit all of the motor units for a given muscle that we need for a particular movement. And so one of the things that happens that you guys will see when we do resistance training or when you practice to try to acquire some new kind of skill is that you're going to get better at motor unit recruitment, and therefore you can get more force and you're going to be able to lift more weight, or you're going to be able to run faster or jump higher. You're going to kind of maximize the ability that you inherently have given the size of your muscles and the number of motor units and things that you have. Okay. So I know I kind of went a little above and beyond. We kind of got ahead of ourselves, but I think trying to contextualize all of this stuff together is really, really important to help you guys understand, one, why I think it's important, but two, maybe kind of how this is all going to work. Okay. Gavin, you had a question.
Yeah, I just think it's unrelated. It was just about like hang cleaning versus a power clean, like what you would recommend type of deal.
I recommend neither. So, my father, the high school football coach, ruined me on power cleans or hang cleans or anything else for the entirety of my life, because my dad, when he was kind of coming up and coaching the team that was really, really good and kind of was at the forefront of strength and conditioning, was Nebraska. And Nebraska was big on doing power cleans. And so my dad just decided, your leg hurts, power clean. You want to run faster, power clean. You want to get bigger muscles, power clean. You want to jump higher, power clean. So there were a lot of power cleans that were done maybe under duress in my life. And so I've sworn off all of them. Although we did some in Orange Theory last week with some dumbbells and things. But that wasn't too bad in that way. So I mean, they're good for you. Like hang clean, power clean, depending upon what you want to do, Gavin. Like, I don't really think it matters. Unless you're going to be like in a powerlifting competition, I think doing any of it is probably good for you. It trains explosiveness and those kinds of things. So we can have that discussion at some other point. Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right. Let me do this. Okay. So if we have the big picture in this idea of recruiting motor units, I need to give you a little bit more detail on this. Okay. So you are, for most movements that you're going to do, for most lifts or running or walking, whatever it is, you're going to have to turn on more than one motor unit in order to generate a sufficient amount of force to do that particular movement. Okay. So Jacob's doing his 40-pound dumbbell curl. Let's just say he's got to turn on 150 motor units in his bicep to be able to get just slightly more than 40 pounds of force in order to be able to pick the dumbbell up. Okay. So there is a rhyme and a reason. Let's say he has 200 total motor units and he's got to turn on 150 of them. There's a rhyme and a reason as to which 150 he's going to turn on out of his 200. It is not random. Okay. And so what tends to happen is we are going to turn on motor units using something called the size principle. Okay. The size principle of motor unit recruitment. And what that means is, remember that motor units come in sort of small ones where they innervate maybe 10 or 20 muscle fibers, all the way up to some that are really, really big where they're going to innervate 1,000 or several thousand fibers. We're going to recruit the smallest motor units first all the time. Okay. That's the way that this works. It starts off where you get the smallest ones. Okay. Which, remember, those tend to be slow twitch. So we do a little bit. That's not enough force. We do one more. That's not enough force. We do another one. And they're going to get increasingly bigger as our motor units are going to begin to go up. And so in a practical sense, what that also means is that if we look at, so on my graph here, this is the percentage of active muscle fibers. Okay, so in our example with Jacob, let's say he's got to turn on 150 motor units out of a possible 200. So he's at about, we'll just call it about here, he's at about 75% of everything turned on. Okay. Don't worry about this being exercise intensity as a percentage of VO2 max. Let's just say that he needs to be able to lift 40 pounds and that maybe his max is like 55 or something. Jacob, we just magically made you stronger. Okay. So what happens is you turn on one motor unit here. It's a slow twitch motor unit. That doesn't get me to my 40 pounds. Then I do another motor unit. That gets me a little bit more force. And another, and another, and another, and another, and so on. And at some point, I will have turned on all of my slow twitch motor units, and I'm then going to move into my type 2A fiber type motor units, which are getting steadily bigger and bigger. They're having more fibers in them. So I got one here, and one there, and one there, and so on, until I get right here and get just the right amount of force that I need. Okay. Your brain can do this really, really fast. Like you don't have to think about, ooh, one, now a second, now a third, and I need all the way up to 150. Your brain just kind of knows, ooh, we need about this many, turn these on, and then it makes these very, very slight adjustments out here based kind of upon past experience. But this is the way that this is going to work, okay? And so in our scenario here, Jacob can lift his 40 pounds. He's at about 75% of his motor neurons. And so therefore, now when he needs to do another rep, then he's got some additional muscle fibers out here that as he begins to get tired, he can call them in. Or if he needed to lift more than 40, he needed to lift 50 pounds or something, then he's got some reserve up here that he could also turn on when he needed to get more force. At some point though, we reach this top portion here where there are physically no more motor units to turn on, okay? People that are used to doing resistance training, they're used to lifting very heavy weights, or they're used to running really fast or something, they can get very, very close to recruiting every motor unit from a given muscle. And when they get to that place, then that's it. They're not going to get any more force. That's as strong in some ways as they can be for that given kind of muscle size and those things. Okay. So I have a schematic here that I've put together that I hope illustrates kind of the same thing here. And so let's imagine you need to do, we've got Jacob doing his curls. He recruits one motor unit, right? And he's got some fibers that are on. That's not enough. He does a second one. There's these small type 1 fibers. He's getting more and more. Eventually he would turn on some 2As. And he turns on more. And if he needed enough, eventually he would get into recruiting his type 2X fibers in that way. Okay. And so you just kind of ramp up the number of muscle fibers you're turning on by recruiting more and more motor units. Okay. And that's how we tend to very generally get more force production when we need to lift increasingly heavy things. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Have you guys heard of the size principle of motor unit recruitment previously? Okay. Gavin's not so sure. Gabby's shaking her head. Yes. Okay. My guess is that if you learned about it, there's a reason why the slow ones go first, and it has to do with the size of the motor neurons. And the motor neurons are smaller, which means they need fewer action potentials to make them depolarize. There's some really interesting kind of the physics of electricity as to why this is the case. But that's what's going on. Okay. All right, so we talked about these things. We mentioned this a little bit yesterday. There's some benefit to recruiting these slow twitch or small motor units first, okay? It functionally really lets us do two things, okay? So when we're doing everyday activities that don't require a huge amount of force, see me being addicted to caffeine and having to drink my Diet Mountain Dew over and over again with things, what happens is when you're doing relatively low force contractions, you're recruiting these slow twitch, relatively fatigue resistant muscle fibers. And that means I can do some of these low force tasks over and over and over and over again without fatigue, without getting tired. And so that can be a good thing. Okay. Think of this like breathing. When you're breathing at rest, right, you're not having to use a huge amount of your diaphragm in those things. Your diaphragm is probably the slowest muscle in your body. It's very, very fatigue resistant. But you can just imagine that, like, if I had to recruit fast twitch fibers in my diaphragm, I'm going to get out of breath and get tired breathing just kind of here at rest. That would not be a good thing. Okay. Lets us walk for longer periods of time, hold our posture, things like that. Okay. Additionally, because our slow units are very, very small, because they have relatively few muscle fibers in them, it lets us have very, very precise and kind of fine control of low force contractions. And it's this fine motor control that lets us do things like write with a pen. Okay. You're not grinding your pen into your sheet. It lets us type. It lets us do that. It lets us play musical instruments and a whole host of other kinds of things. Okay. So recruiting these small ones first give us lots and lots of fine motor control during low force contractions. As contraction force goes up and the motor units get bigger and bigger, when a new one gets turned on, you get bigger and bigger jumps in force, and you begin to lose some of your fine kind of motor control in that particular way. Okay, so there's some good that comes from this particular way that the system is organized and the way that things are going to be kind of functioning and getting turned on. Okay, next thing. All right, next thing. So imagine now we have turned on our motor units. Okay, we're able to generate force. All right. What I hate to tell you now is that you think, I've recruited X number of motor units, right? I've generated some amount of force from that particular muscle. It's generated potentially some level of movement, okay? Well, not all muscle contractions are created equally. And within a type of muscle contraction, not all speeds of muscle contraction are going to allow us to generate the same amount of force production. Okay, so, and I really should do this. I should probably add a slide kind of back in here on something, but I think it's in the slide later on, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce the types of muscle contractions here, and then we'll do this idea of what happens with increasing velocity or slowing of contraction velocity. Okay, so muscle contractions come in 3 flavors or 3 types. Okay, the first type is what's called concentric. Okay, I apologize, my C's look like O's. Other types of contractions are called eccentric, and then there's a type of contraction that's called isometric. Okay, the type of contraction is really going to refer to what is happening to the length or the change in length of the muscle that we have turned on. Okay, so a concentric contraction is when the muscle gets shorter or it shortens. Okay, the power strokes are letting the muscle shorten. An eccentric contraction is when the muscle is lengthening. And an isometric contraction is when neither of those two things happen and length is stable. Okay, so we're going to go back to our bicep curl situation. Okay, I pick a weight up and I hold it right here while I'm doing my bicep curl. I hold it in place. That's an isometric contraction. My bicep is neither shortening nor lengthening. I'm generating just exactly as much force as I need to hold that weight in place. That's an isometric contraction. There's no movement, no velocity. Okay. When I come up like this, my bicep is getting shorter. That's a concentric contraction. So I curl up, shortening. Then I'm going to lengthen the muscle back out and set the weight down or set whatever I have in my arm down with my bicep. The bicep is lengthening. That's an eccentric contraction. Okay. So some weird things happen based upon how the cross bridges are going to cycle and function with eccentric versus isometric versus concentric contractions. Okay. So we're going to start off now by talking about concentric and isometric contractions and the idea of either having no movement and no like sort of speed or velocity of movement versus things going faster and faster. Okay. So what you guys can see here in this graph here that was published in 1950 is this is what we call a force velocity curve. Okay. And what is showing on the graph is here on the x-axis is the force that the cross bridges are generating. And then on the y-axis, we're graphing the velocity of contraction or the velocity of shortening. So how fast basically are form a cross bridge, power stroke and it shortens, relax, reform, power stroke, relax, reform. So as that goes faster and faster, what's happening to force production, okay? And so what you will look at this is down here on the bottom where there is zero velocity, okay? Zero velocity. So right here, this is an isometric contraction. There's no movement, therefore there's no velocity. All right. And so, no, wait, sorry, I went backwards. Scratch that, scratch that. This is not an isometric contraction. My bad, my bad, my bad. Isometric contractions down here with all of this. I'm confusing myself. Okay. Zero velocity. And what you will note then is that in an isometric contraction, that's where I'm going to have the highest level of force production. So I can hold more weight statically right here. I could pick up and hold a heavier dumbbell, right? Then I could actually curl and go through a full range of motion upwards, okay? Isometric contraction, the most force. And then you will note that as velocity goes up, so this is a slow contraction down here. This is a fast contraction up here. As velocity increases, my force production is going to decline, okay? So when we want to go very fast, we can't generate as much force as when we want to go slow, okay? So in a very practical sense, if you went to the weight room and you were going to lift weights and you're going to do any kind of exercise, if you try to go very fast while you're doing that exercise, you can't lift as much weight, okay? And so when you watch people, if we were able to have our lab in person, we would lift a weight and find our 1 repetition max, which we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll find the heaviest weight that we can lift. What you see is that when people do those lifts, they're moving the weight very, very, very slowly because they're all the way out here on that force velocity curve, okay? And so you can lift a 5-pound dumbbell, you can curl a 5-pound dumbbell really, really fast. I then give you a 40-pound dumbbell and you're going to go much, much slower. Okay. So the reason that this is what happens, okay, all has to do with the mechanics of how the cross bridges are formed and broken and reformed. Okay. So generally, force generated by a muscle is 100% dependent upon the engagement of cross bridges. So when you form more cross bridges, you get more force, okay? If we hold this to be true, which it is, okay, then as velocity goes up and our force production goes down, we must infer from that as velocity increases, we must not have as many cross bridges engaged, okay? And that is indeed exactly what is happening, okay? To go very fast, you have to engage a cross bridge, but then you have to break the cross bridge and then have it go back to its high energy state and then reform the cross bridge, move, break, back, and you have to do this very, very quickly. So what happens is, while we're going fast, because you're having to break, or what we oftentimes refer to as cycle, the cross bridges, then at any given instant in time, there are fewer cross bridges that are going to be bound and engaged at any instant than when you're going slower or when you're doing an isometric contraction. Okay, so many of them are breaking, and they're breaking so often and so quickly that there's just fewer of them engaged at any moment. And that's why our force production is going to go down. And so this has some really interesting implications for running or biking or jumping or really any kind of movement where we need to go very, very fast, because we actually can't maximize our force production by going fast. And so we have to kind of learn how to strike some balances on these things. And that's really the subject of, if you want to take strength and conditioning class or you want to take endurance training class, y'all will talk more about kind of how we can alter the way this curve looks with training. Okay. Okay. How many of you are still with me? How many of you does this make sense for? Because if it doesn't, that's perfectly okay. This is almost as kind of conceptually nuanced as anything that we're going to do in the entirety of class. Okay. If you can get this, the rest of class will be a breeze. Okay. So as we near time, probably for our break here, how many of you guys are with me? Any questions? Gavin thinks he's with me. Gabby's with me. Okay. Get a thumbs up from Emma. Okay. Good deal. All right. So I'm going to do one more thing and then we'll take our break. Okay. Because I've only shown you guys 2/3 of the story. Okay. So we've covered isometric contractions and we've covered concentric contractions. We've not talked about what happens during lengthening or eccentric contractions. And it's wild. Okay. It's wild. Eccentric contractions are my favorite thing to look at and to study and to talk about, because they're so weird and they're so different in comparison to everything else. Okay. So this graph that I have here, okay, is also a force velocity graph, but I want you guys to pay attention that what has happened is we've actually flipped the axes around. So force is here on the y-axis and velocity is here on the x-axis. And so what I'm going to do is the right side of this graph here, okay, this side on over here, this is what I just showed you basically. It is as we go faster and faster with shortening, force production is going to decline. So here's a fast concentric contraction. Here's a slow concentric contraction. The intersection point here, that's an isometric contraction. Look at what happens though when we are getting sort of negative velocity. So this is lengthening contraction. So we're going faster, but we're just doing it in a negative direction. So fast is out here, slow is going to be here. Look at what happens with eccentric contractions that's very, very different than concentric contractions. As we go faster eccentrically, we actually gain a little bit of force production. And then eventually out here, it mostly plateaus off. Okay. So what we tend to say is that eccentric contractions, force is independent of contraction velocity. Okay. There's no effect of velocity on all of those things. If you also look at this, okay, you will note that even doing slow eccentric contractions, you're getting more force than you can get anywhere over here on in a concentric contraction. And so if you can hold more weight isometrically than you can pick up, you can actually lower down even more weight than you can hold steady or be able to pick up. Okay. And so in general, you can lower down maybe somewhere between 15 and 20% more weight than you can ever pick up. So if you can curl up 40 pounds, you can probably lower down 50. Okay. And so it's kind of a wild thing. And so the reason that this is the case, the reason that these eccentric contractions, one, let you get more force, and two, why they seem to be independent of velocity, is again, it goes back to what's happening at the level of the cross bridges. So when we do a lengthening contraction, the cross bridges don't have to cycle. Myosin engages and forms this cross bridge, but the external weight that is being applied or that you're doing is greater than the force that we're able to generate. So it just sort of pulls the actin along in the opposite direction, and the myosin head stays attached. So because it doesn't have to cycle, then we're not going to lose force from that. And then we get more force, and we get more force as we go faster, also because as the muscle lengthens, we're going to stretch the connective tissue, okay? There's connective tissue at the Z lines, there's connective tissue around the fibers and the fascicles, and then in the tendons and the ligaments. We stretch that connective tissue. And as you stretch those things, we store elastic energy, okay? We're gonna store elastic energy. And then as we go, then that elastic energy is going to provide an additional amount of force to resist against gravity pulling whatever weight it is that we have that goes down. Okay, so we don't lose force with velocity because there's no detachment, there's no cycling of the cross bridges, and we get more force eccentrically than concentrically because we store that elastic energy. So you've got sort of whatever your muscles can generate plus the force from the stored elastic energy. And so that's kind of some really interesting things that we're going to do. Okay. Before we take a break, can I get a volunteer to try to do something for us? I'm going to have you guys do something in front of your camera for us to illustrate one of the real kind of benefits of why eccentric contractions and this extra stored energy is really important. Anybody want to volunteer? I will just pick someone if need be. Anybody? No? Okay. All right. I'm going for it. Let me look. Wyatt, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you in a place where you could safely turn on your camera and try one thing for us?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you be so kind as to do that, please? Uh-oh. There he is. Perfect. Hi, Wyatt. All right, here's what I want you to do for me, bud. I want you to just sort of stand up out of your chair, step back where we can still kind of see you, and I want you to try to jump up and touch the ceiling. We just need to see you, not the ceiling. Oh, he's getting real into this now. Okay. All right, everybody cheer for Wyatt. All right, we're going to count you down. 3, 2, 1, go. Boom. Perfect. Yay. Thank you, Wyatt. All right, we'll do it this way. Ireland, are you there?
Yes.
What did Wyatt do before he jumped?
He bent his knees to gain force to propel himself higher.
Exactly. He bent his knees. So when you jump, you use your quadriceps and your glutes, right? They're going to do a concentric contraction to generate force to do knee extension to propel you upwards. What he did before he jumped, which is what everybody does before we do a lot of movements, is he did a squat down, lengthen those muscles, okay? Before you jump, store elastic energy, now jump up and you've got force from my muscles concentrically to go up, plus I release that stored elastic energy so I get extra propulsion from all of that. That's why when we throw a baseball or a football, we're going to go backwards first, right? We're stretching, storing energy, right? So we get some extra force from that. So there we go. So there's an actual, that's called a stretch shortening cycle. It's a very kind of common thing. But this is kind of some of the practical applications of why doing eccentric contractions, or why this kind of difference in the way that the mechanics of both the cross bridges and the ligaments and tendon and connective tissue work are really fascinating. Okay. All right. Anybody have questions about this? Okay. No questions. Let's take a break. Let's come back at, I'll give you guys 7 minutes. Let's come back at 11:53. Okay. So here's what I want everybody, here's what I want you guys to do for our next little thought experiment. Okay. So the next piece of stuff that we need to cover is you can generate force. Now we're going to go and we're going to lift weights. Okay. So quick show of like hands or camera flashes. How many of you have done any kind of weightlifting at some point in your life, then sort of raise your hand. We kind of all do this. Okay. Right. So we've got at least like 3/4 of you guys. So the vast majority of you guys have done some kind of weightlifting. Okay. So let me ask the question now in this way. Addie, why did you lift weights?
Because I felt lazy and I just wanted to do something really.
Okay, but like what were you hoping to, other than not feeling lazy, like what were you hoping to gain from lifting weights? We'll do this, we'll ask it that way. I'll try to be more specific.
Muscle, I guess.
Muscle. You wanted bigger muscles. Okay. Seems very, very reasonable. Let me think, somebody else that had raised their hand on those things. Aaron, you had your hand up. Why did you lift weights?
I was a student athlete at the time, so I had to, but also the point was to gain strength so that we could like last longer and perform better.
Okay. You wanted to gain strength. Okay. Addie wants the bigger muscles. Aaron wanted more strength. Do we think those two things are related? Do you think if you have a bigger muscle, it's stronger? Well, that's a loaded question if there ever was one, but what do you guys think? Jessica, you look very pensive there on all of that. What do you think? Do you think bigger muscles are stronger than smaller muscles?
I actually really don't, just because like one of my friends, she does like bikini competition. She's extremely tiny, but that girl can outlift most men I know. So that's where I'm kind of like questionable.
Do you think if you had a similarly trained bikini competition trained guy who was bigger than her, do you think he would be stronger than her?
I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's not a problem. There's lots of kind of interesting things. Okay. Madison, what do you think if you're not on the phone? Do you think that there's a relationship between how big muscles are and how strong they are? Uh-oh, we've lost Madison. No worries. We'll move on. Taylor, are you there?
Yes.
What do you think? Do you think how big my muscles are is going to play some role in how much weight I could lift or how strong I am?
I think it does a little bit.
Okay.
But it kind of depends on the person too.
It does kind of depend on the person. Okay. You know, if we were to see everybody in the classroom, this is what I normally would do in that way. And I would tell you guys to like look around in the classroom. So imagine you've gone to the gym, okay? And I tell you to look around at everybody that's there. And I said, you have to pick out the person that's the strongest person in the gym. What would you probably look for? Any ideas? Gavin, what would you be looking for? Jessica, what are you looking for? Who's the strongest person in the gym? What's the first thing you're thinking about?
I'd probably like go with the stereotypical, the biggest person.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Gavin's not so sure.
I don't know. I think the strongest, like when I go to the gym and see people at the gym, I think the strongest people are usually like training legs, honestly.
Oh, okay.
That's how I look at it, at least.
So I can't train legs and be big. Okay. I mean, I know there's kind of a stereotype, right? Like the people that are doing legs are, maybe they're not those other things. Okay.
Well,
okay.
Is that a myth too? Like I've heard that like training legs produces more testosterone. No, it's a myth as well.
I say that. I mean, it's not. So would it really blow y'all's mind if I told you that sort of testosterone increases and growth hormone increases in the aftermath, kind of in the hours immediately following resistance training, has now been shown to play practically zero role in the amount of increase in muscle size that you get in response to resistance training? That your basal level, like your normal level of testosterone matters, or if you take more testosterone, then that matters. But the increase you get after exercise is not very related to anything. We've kind of turned all of this. There's some data from a group in Canada that has kind of turned all of this on its head. But if you do lift legs, testosterone released after exercise is directly related to the amount of muscle that was engaged. And so in general, if your legs are bigger than your arms, then you're probably going to get a little bit more testosterone from doing legs, but not like a massive amount or anything like that. And in some ways, not that release actually matters. Okay, so probably if I told you guys, like you're in a room and you're going to be like, all right, who's the strongest person in the room? It's the person that's the biggest, right? Maybe it's the person you think that has the most defined muscles or something. We can kind of get semantical on all of this, but in general, we think stronger, bigger, okay? I say famously in my high school, one of our high school teachers had said, never get in a fight with a fat guy. Which was a horrible thing to say on so many levels. But he said that, you know, if you're big and they hit you, you're going to be in trouble in those ways, because when you're big, if you have a lot of excess adipose tissue, you got to have a lot of muscle to carry it all around and all of these other kinds of things. So in a very general sense, okay, long, terrible story about my high school teachers and these kinds of things. But in general, bigger muscles are stronger than smaller muscles, okay? Bigger muscles, stronger than smaller muscles. There's some caveats to all of that, but in general, that's the case, okay? Joffney, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Why do you think bigger muscles would be stronger than smaller muscles? It's a very simple answer to this.
Well, usually bigger muscles can produce more force and, you know, have more like, they can contract more, I guess, because they're bigger.
Okay, so but what is it about them being bigger that lets them generate more force? If we think about the things that we've just talked about that actually where the force is generated, why would having more muscle potentially give me the option or the potential to generate more force? Where does force come from in a muscle?
It comes from the contraction bridges and like the you know, how the length, how much it can stretch from the tropomyosin to the you know, to the tropomyosin head and stuff like that.
Good. You're
more. Yeah.
You're absolutely right on track. Okay. Force comes from cross bridges. Force comes from myosin interacting with actin. If I have a bigger muscle, I can have more actin and myosin in that muscle. Therefore, I should be able to, within reason, form more cross bridges, and therefore I can generate more force. Okay. So now remember that if I train like that, people can have very, very big muscles and they cannot be as strong as somebody that has a smaller muscle because of velocity, because of contraction type, because of the person with big muscles not being very good at recruiting or turning on all of that muscle that they have in those kinds of ways. Okay. So there are some other things that go into this, but at its most basic, having a bigger muscle gives us, in theory, the potential to have more force because we can form more cross bridges. So one of the things that you guys have talked about, when I resistance train, okay, it will increase the size of my muscles, and therefore I will have now more actin and myosin. I can form more cross bridges, and I should be stronger, okay? And I should be stronger. So my question, I know that Addie said she didn't want to be lazy. She was feeling lazy, so she went to lift weights. Did you go like once, Addie, or like was it like go multiple times? Like it would be interesting. Like I'm doing this whole weightlifting regime just because I don't want to feel lazy in that particular way.
I'm just more of a runner. So
Mostly a runner. See, I much prefer aerobic exercise to resistance exercise as well in the midst of all of this. I'm right there with you. Again, I blame my father, the football coach. It's his fault. Although he was a marathon runner too, so we did a lot of things. The running seems better to me. So, Addie, did your muscles get bigger?
no.
No. Okay. Any of the rest of you that have done resistance training, did your muscles get bigger? Julia, you're nodding yes. Your muscles got bigger?
Yeah, I even have like progress pictures that
Okay.
I've taken.
How much bigger have they gotten?
Like very a
Okay,
lot
but I mean
bigger.
like 10% bigger, 50%
Like,
bigger, 100% bigger. Like how big?
I would say my quads and my biceps probably doubled the size. Yeah,
Okay.
like around 30% to 50%, I would say.
Now we need
from
you,
the pictures.
you to give us one of these. I'm going to show off that massive
No,
bicep.
it's not massive. It used to be really small, but
Okay.
like now it's kind of
No.
like
There we go. See,
you can see some.
impressive. Everything we have is good. Okay. So I asked that question because you think it's maybe like that much bigger. Have you gotten stronger, Julia?
Yeah, definitely.
How much stronger have you gotten?
Well,
how much more weight can you lift now than when you started?
So compared to like a month ago, I would hip thrust like for 12, 140. Now I do like 180 for 12.
Okay.
That is so impressive.
Yeah, it's really good. So you've gotten in like a month, what will take you really like 120 or 140 and 40% of that. So, I mean, you've gotten like 30% stronger or something in the midst of those kinds of things. Okay. So how much stronger do you think you can get?
I think I can get stronger, definitely. Like more.
But like, can you get to 250? Could you do 300? Like,
yeah, that's my goal. Like
that's your goal. Okay.
Yeah. But
okay.
I don't know. I mean, based on my genetics, I know it has to do with a lot of the genetics. I feel like I can because we have really bulky people in my family.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what that means, bulky, and exactly how that would be related. I have a general idea. We don't have to talk about it. And I would just tell you that may be a bit of a myth as well that we will try to bust tomorrow on some things. But
I meant people with more like type 2 fibers than type 1.
Okay. Family of sprinters. So I'm doing all of this, guys, before we sort of jump into things, because it sounds like, so the other piece of this, so we think that maybe we could double how strong we get 100% stronger or something like that. Julia, do you think you could make your muscles twice as big as they were to start with? You think that's possible?
Probably not.
Okay, probably not.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like we're predetermined in a way, like how big we can get.
We're absolutely predetermined. There's a big genetic component, as we will talk about. So this is a question that is usually better directed at very stereotypically a bro. But in general, guys, how much can you make your muscles get bigger? Like how big can we get? What do you guys think is a reasonable kind of thing? I think if we went to Steel there in Norman to the big gym and we asked people like, how big can you get? What are they going to tell us? I can add 30 pounds of muscle. I can add 40 pounds of muscle. I can add 50 pounds of muscle. I can only add 5. Like, what do you think people are going to tell us?
I mean, I think they would say something like, you can build as much as you want as long as you work hard enough and keep at it consistently. I mean, I think at one point I've heard people say like they can get like 30 or 40 pounds of muscle. Now it's not just in your arms, it's all over your body, but you can still build muscle. And I think it's based off like how much protein you can intake at the same time you're working out,
Okay. So what Jofny says is a very common thing that people think. If that's the case, why do we not have like these just massive, like why is everybody that lifts weights and eats enough protein not like the most massive? Like they just exponentially, like these just ginormous, huge people. Why don't they all look like the mountain on Game of Thrones or something, where there's just these huge strongman looking dudes or ladies, whatever, in that way? Like why is that not the case? Emma, do you have thoughts? Oh, go for it, Jofny. That's fine.
I think there's just I don't know, like I know I just said, I'm just kind of, it sounds like I'm going to contradict what I just said, but
That's okay.
also limit to how much you can make, I guess your body can make.
Right. So this is, I appreciate you guys kind of walking through all of this with me, and I'll try to put a little bow on the top of all of this, and then we'll talk about some of the things that do actually change. Aaron, I see you. Let me at least sort of spit my thoughts out before I forget them, and then I'll come back to you. Okay. So one of the greatest myths in all of exercise, okay, surrounds how much stronger we can get with resistance training, and just how much bigger we can make our muscles with resistance training. And there's lots of cultural things with this. There's stuff about there's a sort of a gender role component to this, about women being worried that they're, they don't want to get that big, or they can't get that big, or, some things that surround all of that, and these other kinds of things. But the take home from all of this is that, one, everybody can make their muscles bigger. I say that almost everybody can make their muscles bigger. Okay. There are a few of you guys, maybe not anybody in class, but there are a few people that no matter what they do, their muscles won't get any bigger. The extent to which your muscles can get bigger is mostly determined by a complex set of genetic factors, okay, which are beyond the scope of this class. All right. But in general, okay, we can all get bigger, we can all get stronger. We can probably get significantly stronger, okay? We can get a larger increase in strength than we can in the basic increase in muscle size, okay? Most people dramatically, I cannot emphasize this enough, dramatically overestimate how much bigger their muscles are going to get, okay? The actual numbers on hypertrophy is over the course of maybe 16 to 20 weeks of training, so maybe 4 or 5 or 6 months of training, an average person is probably going to fall somewhere at about 15% increase in the size of a given muscle, okay? About a 15% increase. Over that same time, that same person may get an increase in strength that may be 50 or 60% of an increase in strength, okay? We tend to get significantly more increases or larger increases in strength than we can in muscle size. Now, there are some people that can make their muscles 50% bigger or 80% bigger, okay? There are some of you that are only going to get 5% bigger with your muscles no matter what it is that you do. Here's a fun thought exercise, though. Let's say you can make every muscle in your body 15% bigger, okay? 15% bigger. Anybody want to share with us how much you weigh, and I can do some quick math on this? Anybody care? Anybody want to share their weight?
I weigh about 140.
Okay. Daphne weighs about 140. All right. You're kind of right in the wheelhouse of sort of what my example of these things are. Assuming you're a fairly stereotypical college-aged male who's maybe 15 to 18% body fat, Daphne, you are probably going to, if we made every single muscle in your body 15% bigger, you know how much weight you'd gain? Like maybe 10 pounds, maybe 8 pounds, something like that. Okay. Every muscle. You can't train every muscle. You're not going to train every muscle. Every muscle got that much bigger. That's how much bigger you would be. Okay. 15%. Okay. So ladies, this is a very common myth among women. I don't want to do resistance training. I don't want to look mannish. I don't want to have these giant big muscles. You're not going to have giant big muscles. The guys aren't going to have giant big muscles. Okay. Now, some people will. The ones that have really big ones, they're all taking steroids. Steroids change everything. You take steroids, you work out, we have no idea how big your muscles can get. We have no idea how much stronger you can get. It changes everything in that particular way. Okay. So keep all of that in mind. You might be able to get 100% stronger on an exercise you've never done before, but you're only going to after 12 or 16 weeks, you're only going to have, maybe a couple of pounds of an increase in muscle mass and those kinds of things. So just kind of keep all of that in mind. Okay. So Aaron, you had a question, then we'll do Julia's question.
My question is actually about steroids.
Okay.
Whoa, that sounded bad. I knew a like a myth or something. I don't know if it's a myth 100%, but like I have heard of people like can't gain weight and stuff like that, and then they took steroids and like started going to the gym. But does that actually make them stronger? Does that by any chance like create, I don't know, like how does that make someone gain more weight throughout their muscles or something?
Sure. So we don't really talk about the idea of protein synthesis and how muscles are made very much in this class. You'll talk a lot more about it in exercise phys. It's a really fascinating kind of process. But what happens when you need to make more muscle is in the nuclei, or in those myonuclei, those multinuclear things that are in every muscle fiber, they just get turned on and the genes get turned on and they make more actin and myosin. And then through a relatively complex series of other steps, those actin and myosin molecules get incorporated into the existing muscle fibers, and those fibers begin to get bigger. And then that's kind of how you gain weight. That's how you gain strength in some ways on top of all of that. When I give you steroids, I give you testosterone. One of the things that it does is it promotes tissue growth. And so that testosterone goes and it binds on a testosterone receptor in the nucleus of those muscle fibers, and it tells those nuclei to make more actin and myosin, and then to make all of the other associated things that are going to be with skeletal muscle in that particular way. And so testosterone promotes growth in that way, in the same way that growth hormone does. There's a thing called insulin-like growth factor, or IGF, that does some things. And so when you supplement those, one of the consequences is it just, as long as you're giving yourself enough food, you're giving yourself enough protein in your diet so that you have stuff to make those new proteins from, then you're going to get bigger. And testosterone it's a very, very powerful kind of anabolic substance that drives tissue growth.
So you can actually get bigger on steroids rather than just like your natural body type. So is it kind of like instead of just gaining like 10 pounds overall, you could gain like 50?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Taking steroids defies your genetic potential, right? We all have some genetic potential based upon the number of muscle fibers we have, based upon what our diet is going to be, based upon our kind of baseline growth hormone, testosterone levels, and some other kind of things that we don't fully understand. When you supplement growth hormone, testosterone, and these things, and you get a supra kind of physiological level, then it counteracts all of those normal kind of stop points that the genetics put on things. Absolutely. So if you hear of someone and you see someone that's not like 18 years old that says, oh yeah, I gained 30 pounds of muscle in one sporting off season, all bets are off with 18-year-olds, or even sometimes 19 and 20-year-olds, because they're still actually growing and those kinds of things, and they've maybe not had proper nutrition. But you get a 30-year-old who says, I put on 40 pounds of muscle in the off season, like during football season or between baseball seasons or something, and it legitimately is mostly muscle, then they're 100% on steroids. Like there's no way around that. Like that's not a normal thing that happens. That's not to say that you guys can resistance train and not gain 20 or 30 pounds, because you don't just gain muscle. When you gain muscle, you gain bone mineral density, you gain connective tissue, you're gaining water and some of these kinds of things. And so it's not that simple of a process, but you're not going to just simply only gain. I gained 20 pounds, but 7 pounds of it is muscle and the other 15 is, something else. Does that make sense? Okay. Julia, your question, and then we'll do Wyatt's question.
Okay, so let's say that I've hypertrophied to 100% based on my genetics. I don't even know if that's possible, but
it is.
It is. Okay, so how can I, since force is based on the amount of like cross bridges that you make, how is my force able to increase if I've already reached the 100% like amount of?
Anybody want to try to take a guess at the answer to that?
Is it like firing action potentials, like you increase the frequency of it? Is that sort of it?
Increase the frequency, but so what normally happens, Julia, is that you can add muscle, but you still have to be able to turn that muscle on. Your nervous system still has to be able to recruit that extra muscle. And so people will get to a place where they're not going to be able to get any bigger, but they can teach their nervous system how to turn on the muscle or the muscles that they have in a slightly better way, or in a slightly, if it's a complex movement, it doesn't just involve one muscle. You can learn kind of different recruitment strategies for your accessory muscles and things, and you can continue to gain a little bit of strength. But in a lot of people, if you lift consistently for many, many years, you're going to get really close to, I am just about as big and as strong as I'm ever going to be able to be. Like, there is a top end limit in theory in everyone. And people that are novice, we'll talk about this in some of the slides, people that are novice lifters, like, they get a lot stronger really fast. Like, you've gotten a lot stronger in the last month if maybe you had never done that lift before, but then that's going to start to slow down. Right? You get all of these changes in the nervous system initially that are going to give you lots of extra strength using the muscle you already have. But at some point you get really close to being able to turn on all the muscle you have. And then you have to wait until you get more muscle, and you got to learn how to turn that muscle on. And so you get a lot stronger really quickly. And then it really begins to kind of level out, and you go kind of these little small increments as we go along, which can be very frustrating for people. It's one of the reasons that adherence to resistance training tends to decline over time, is that people love being like, ooh, I'm getting really strong here really, really fast. And then that kind of levels out and they're like, oh, I don't like this anymore. So
there is a cap for like strength once you've reached. Okay.
There is in theory, although it's really hard for us to know what that is, right? Because how do we know for sure you could never lift like one more pound than whatever you have? Like, it's a kind of a thought exercise, but in theory there is. Yeah. Wyatt, your question, bud?
Yeah, so I just kind of got into lifting like consistently, and so if anybody who lifts, there's a whole big thing about supplements. Like, supplements are a big thing.
Don't need them.
Yeah, the testosterone thing. I know a lot of my friends that are into like the creatine hype or whatever. I didn't know the whole theory behind that.
So creatine specifically, there's some evidence that creatine, if you supplement with creatine, you do get some small additional increases in strength and potentially hypertrophy. But more of what the creatine does is that creatine is not itself anabolic. It's not like taking testosterone. The creatine doesn't drive an increase in muscle. What tends to happen, we'll do a little bit of metabolism, but you take the creatine, and so you have more stored something called creatine phosphate in your muscles. And the creatine phosphate, when you need to recycle ATP, like during resistance training, creatine phosphate is one of the sources. You steal the phosphate from there and put it onto ADP, and you make ATP again. And so the end point of all of that is that having more creatine phosphate in your muscles may let you do one additional rep here or there, or two additional reps here or there. And so what it does is it actually functions like as a training aid. It lets you lift a little bit more weight or do an additional rep or something. And so your workout is a little bit more stressful because of all of that. And that, we think, is what drives the kind of small but consistent kind of effect of creatine on leading to slightly larger increases in strength than not taking the creatine, or slightly larger increases in muscle mass than not taking the creatine. And I say slightly larger, most of the evidence with creatine is it's somewhere between like maybe like 5%, a 5% additional increase in strength or muscle size is about all you can get from the creatine. But, that's a real thing. With testosterone, like, hell, it's huge and giant.
All right, thank you.
Of course. Aaron, you're back with another question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, last one. So when we were looking up like bro myths and stuff, I know a lot of people that go to the gym and they always take pre-workout, but is that kind of the same thing, like along the same lines, or is it just like mostly caffeine, or I don't know?
It depends upon what pre-workout you take. Most of them have caffeine or some other methylxanthine derivative in it, which it's just a stimulant. And so the idea behind the caffeine is you have more energy, and it may let you do an extra rep or something here and there and let you work out more intensely, assuming you're motivated to do that. The other pre-workouts, a lot of them also, they have creatine in them. The creatine before your workout doesn't do you any good. It has to, like, it's not going to get into your muscles and give you more creatine phosphate for a couple of days. So the creatine in there doesn't really help in that one workout that time. A lot of them have protein in them. Protein powder, if I give you protein, make you eat some protein or give you a supplement, your protein synthesis rates in your muscles increase. And they go up a lot, but that doesn't seem to translate very often into like these kind of as significant gains in muscle mass as one might think. You know, like I give you something and your protein synthesis rate goes up 100% after exercise compared to no protein, but you're not going to get 100% bigger by taking the protein powder. You get like 2% bigger or something. And that's a real thing that might matter if you're an Olympic athlete or a college athlete or you're doing some kind of competition, but it's really not like a practical kind of thing. And for the most part, unless you're a vegetarian or unless you're a person that eats very, very little amounts of protein, most Americans get plenty of protein at various places in their diet and they don't need the supplement. You've got plenty. Now, if you're super active and you're training and you're practicing 7 hours a day and doing things, and it probably wouldn't hurt to have some. But that's usually what's in the pre-workout. The big thing in the pre-workout is you need the caffeine, which maybe kind of hypes you up and gives you more energy. And like, now I can lift a little bit more. I'm going to do one more rep. So the workout becomes, in theory, more strenuous. You get more overload from the workout, which we'll probably end up talking about tomorrow. Okay. Chandler.
Is motor unit recruitment the same as like temporal or spatial summation?
That's a master's level question. Where did you learn about temporal and spatial summation?
In physiology and also in biomechanics with Dr. Campbell.
Okay. So technically, no. Well, I say that. It's a semantical debate. I would argue that they are not the same thing as motor unit recruitment, but they are more what we would call motor unit activation. They're states of things that happen or that we can train to happen once the motor unit has been recruited. It's not simply the recruitment is the on or off, and then the firing rate of the number of action potentials, the firing rate, which we haven't talked about, and then the extent to which the firing rates of adjacent motor neurons can line up with each other, which would be sort of temporal summation or those kinds of things, then that's a whole separate thing. And I'm glad that you guys talk about those things. You will probably talk about it a little bit in exercise phys, but it's something I spend quite a bit of time on in my advanced exercise phys class because it's a really kind of fascinating kind of subject on some of those things, but it's a little different.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna talk to Dr. J now and be like, you gotta stop. And this is the problem, right? And we'll just do this and then we'll kind of cut out for today. Because clearly we've just devolved into asking questions about resistance training, which is good, which is really good. I mean, I'll just kind of hit some high points on the slides tomorrow and then we'll move on to our next thing. How many of you guys, let me do this. All right.